This is the Weather Lounge here at WeatherWorks.
Hello there, and welcome to the Weather Lounge. I'm your host, meteorologist Brad Miller, and I, of course, thank you for stopping by and checking out our podcast made possible by Crew Checker Software. We come to you from our WeatherWorks headquarters here in Hackettstown, New Jersey, and of course, sitting across from me is my co-host and good friend, meteorologist Mike Mahalik. Hey there, Mike.
Hey, how's it going, Brad?
It's going all right.
Yeah, it's always good to be here on the Weather Lounge podcast, and this one's a very special episode.
We've been planning this one for weeks.
We've talked about it.
Yes.
We've alluded to it a few times that we can do a whole podcast about
two.
Hurricane Sandy.
Hurricane Sandy.
And now it's 10 years since Hurricane Sandy was there and struck the Northeast here. So I think it's time that we finally do the Hurricane Sandy podcast.
Yeah, and we're all going to have plenty to talk about, especially you. You were here at WeatherWorks. I was down south at the time watching Hurricane Sandy as a meteorologist, though. But, you know, it was something that I remember distinctly, too. But and someone else, though, that will have a lot to add on to this is our guest today. He is our president and CEO here at WeatherWorks, Mr. Frank Lombardo. He'll be joining us here in just a few minutes. But before we get to Frank, though, we are going to take a short break, and then we'll be right back, and Frank will join us here in the Weather Lounge. Stay with us.
And welcome back to the Weather Lounge. I'm meteorologist Mike Mahalik here with Brad Miller, as always, and our special guest for the Sandy podcast.
One and the only.
Special.
Yeah.
Special. I don't like being called special guest, but yeah, I am a guest here.
Our president and CEO.
A guest of his own company.
It's good. It's good to be here. It's good to be here. And
nobody even said your name yet.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Frank Lombardo, how are you doing?
I am doing great. I think this is a great task that we've undertaken, and it's brought back a lot of good, sad memories, and it was a storm to remember.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, we were just talking in the intro about how I can't believe it's 10 years ago that this happened, and I remember it just like it happened the other day, and
I was a kid.
You were a kid?
Well, not quite a kid, but 10 years is a long time for me.
Yeah,
but you're right.
True.
You're right. The memory definitely sticks with you.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, let's just kind of recap the storm a little bit, because just amazing type of stuff for a landfall here in the Northeast and especially in New Jersey. You know, we were talking about a storm that made landfall around Brigantine in New Jersey at 946 millibars.
Yeah, that's unheard of. I mean,
yes,
that's like your strong hurricanes in the middle of the Atlantic.
Keep in mind, our most recent hurricane, Ian, only got down to 940.
Right.
All right. So imagine that here in New Jersey, we had a 946 millibar low.
I mean, I got to bring it up right away because I still remember it like it was yesterday. I remember when we were forecasting this storm, and I asked,
which day in advance?
Oh,
okay.
I don't know. It was a long time. It seemed like we were forecasting it for a month, but really it wasn't. But I remember when it was getting close to impact, and I asked you, I said, Frank, like, what do you think is going to happen here? What do you think this is going to be like, the impacts of this storm? Because, I mean, this is just a 940 some low coming into New Jersey. And you said to me, well, Mike,
I'm scared.
Well, I don't remember I'm scared, but I do remember you saying something like to the effect of, well, I have not seen or experienced a storm with this low a pressure.
And I was scared. I was scared. And this is what we talk about when we talk about these storms. It's like the unknown factor. It's the unexperienced factor. And I was scared when it made that turn toward the coast. Yeah. It was like, okay, this is one for the record book.
You know what, Frank? It's amazing with your weather experience and your history and the knowledge of being in the weather industry for so long, to have that much uncertainty at your stage, and granted it was 10 years ago, but even today with Ian and other storms, there's still a lot of unknown. And that's the beauty, if you will, with meteorology is not everything's the same. Yeah, we can forecast a snowstorm, but there's always something that's different, it seems like.
That is definitely what fascinates us about meteorology, but it's also the obstacle that gets in the way. Because people, the public, becomes accustomed to the nomenclature we give these storms. Hurricane Ian, okay? Oh, it's a Category 3. I've lived through a hurricane that's Category 3, so I don't have to do what I need to do. So, people become accustomed to reacting a certain way, but every one of these monsters is different.
Yeah, right.
Is it the wind field that's expanded? Is it a narrow wind field? Is it a big wind field? Sometimes it's the flooding. We could have a similar storm heading toward the Jersey coast, same direction, same path, but doesn't bring the
same impact.
The same impact, or the impacts are different. It might be wind. Hurricane Donna, it was wind in 1960. It was not so much surge, although there was a big surge in New York City during Hurricane Donna. It was a lot of wind. But yeah, each of these is different. Is a different animal.
Yeah, and going back to some of the recaps, I'm just kind of reading what we have here and what we gathered. The highest wind gust was 96 miles per hour, and that was in Eaton's Park, New York. Islip hit 90 miles per hour. Even inland, as you get towards like Allentown, 81 miles per hour. The coastal flooding, Kings Point, New York, 14.38 feet.
It's amazing.
I mean, it broke, and then the Battery 13.88, and that broke Donna's record of 10 feet. And I mean, that's 3.5 feet.
Oh yeah. Well, when you look at the Sandy Hook gauge and you realize that it broke at 13.31 feet, that actually broke. We don't know where that ended up. If it ended up at 14 or 15 feet. I have a meteorology professor from Kean University who actually had a house in Keansburg, Monmouth County, northeastern Monmouth County, that during that surge, half the house was actually moved away, got totally destroyed. That picture actually made the cover of a lot of national newspapers and magazines. And he talked to me about it and said, he had lived through so many storms. It was one of those older homes on the bay, but like totally destroyed, totally like wiped off the face of the earth.
I mean, and it's funny you mentioned about how the gauge broke at Sandy Hook. Now, I did get a number at 14.4 feet. So I don't know how they arrived at that. Maybe there was some sort of estimate going on there where that actually ended up. But a lot of people around New Jersey talk about December 92 as a very severe coastal flooding, beach erosion situation where
I remember it well.
But that Sandy surpassed that by 4 feet.
Right. And surpassed any of the, again, what I'm starting to realize is that these storms only come with years that end in 2.
Uh-oh.
Okay. We had a 1962 storm, the March 6th and 7th, nor'easter that wiped out a lot of the Jersey Shore.
I don't like where you're going with this.
30 years later, we had the...
Well, what was that of 2022, at least for the Northeast?
30 years later, we had the 1992 storm. 20 years later, we had the 2012 storm. People think of these storms and they think it's a 100-year storm. Well, this particular one might be, but they're all a little bit different. Right. And they do come more frequently than every 100 years. Yeah. And that's what we can't get that mindset. Sandy, on the other hand, might have been a 1 in 500 year event, but
let's hope that's a one and done, at least for
one
my
and done.
lifetime.
I like that.
But I don't like what you're saying there, because we are in 2022, Frank.
Got 3 months left.
We still have some time here, and Sandy impacted New Jersey on the 29th of October. So let's hope.
Hopefully not another
Maybe it's just a December snowstorm. Okay,
let's go for that. Let's go for a blizzard. I like
of
that.
Snow now. Just one last recap here. The rain amounts, they varied, of course, which is typical of any tropical / turning hybrid system. 2 or 3 inches all the way up to about 12 inches, but 3 feet of snow. 3 feet of snow fell in West Virginia on the backside of Sandy, which is
amazing.
You see that the coastal and the things that happened along the New Jersey coast and the flooding and the surge, and then you don't think about the winter side because we are in that time of the year where elevation, just enough cold air.
Absolutely, and that was part of the reason that Sandy took that track was that upper level low, the steering winds, and that contained the cold air to produce that snow.
Probably their biggest snowfall of that season, I would imagine.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Maybe
well, the December
a long time.
The December 92 storm was so intense on the models that I think that's the first time I got scared. Sandy was the second time. Okay. And
then you got scared in 96.
Didn't look right. It looked like there was an error on the maps because this low was deepening so fast off of Maryland and Delaware in the models that it just didn't look real. But it turned out real. But that also produced a lot of snow. Yeah. I mean, that produced 3-4 feet of snow in New York State. We changed the snow here in North Jersey. I think Central Jersey might have seen a little snow at the end of that storm as well. But I had friends in Monmouth County along the beach in historic homes, those huge homes north of Long Branch that got flooded for the first time. They're beachfront, but they're across the street beachfront with big dunes that typically don't have any issues, but they had issues with the 92 storm, significant issues.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how the snow did get involved in this storm because you mentioned the upper low. There was also a big high up to the north.
Absolutely.
That's basically holding up Sandy. Right. So it wouldn't push too far.
Guided it right into the mid-Atlantic.
And then with that upper low coming in, it just kind of wrapped everything back in.
Timing, yeah.
And I mean, I remember seeing the track and I'm just thinking to myself, this is so off the wall. How is this going to actually go down? And I even was looking through our old tweets just yesterday.
Yeah, we were talking
and
about
one
that.
of our meteorologists at the time said, look at this hilarious solution from the Canadian, which brought New Jersey with the left hook right in. And this was on October 21st. And the storm hit on the 29th.
8 days, right. 8 days before.
So it was just like, it didn't end up being hilarious because it actually happened. But it's amazing that panned out.
Again, to my point that, each of these storms is different. The storm did make a turn toward the coast. But as meteorologists, we're fascinated with these storms and we're fascinated with the intensity and how these are driven. And you think what's the scenario for a hurricane in New Jersey? What's the worst case scenario? And a lot of these large cities conduct studies on New York City spends millions of dollars a year conducting studies on how to protect its lowest elevations. I read years ago the study that was conducted for New York City planned on a 960 millibar low hitting, worst case scenario. Okay. So they missed it by 20 millibars.
Yes.
Okay. And that was worst case. So when I see one of these storms and I see Sandy, I think, okay, worst case is still coming. Okay. It can't be worst case.
Right.
Statistically, there has to be something worse than this that will hit New Jersey, and hopefully we get to that later, but are we prepared? But Very unusual track, but it certainly was a track that all the climate models predicted would be worst case scenario for New Jersey, for New York Harbor, for Philadelphia, et cetera.
And the meteorology part of it was correct. I mean, we look at models and of course, it guides us towards our forecast. It's basically guidance, but the meteorology made sense when you saw the setup with the high and the upper level low to the west. And it's kind of like Yeah, I see the meteorology part of it, but it can't happen. That can't happen.
It's that perfect storm combination.
Exactly.
And
all the pieces were in their perfect spot for it to happen.
It's so rare, and it's like all these coincidences have to coincide.
All these moving parts.
These moving parts have to coincide. And I typically, I don't believe that that's going to happen, because typically it doesn't happen.
One thing can go wrong, and then it's a completely different forecast and outcome.
When we talk about chaos in the atmosphere, there are so many moving parts that the further out the forecast, the less likely that forecast is going to fall exactly as the model indicates. But in this case,
yeah. And you talk about the rarity of Sandy, the rarity of the track. Even our clients picked up on this rarity. And we do have a clip from Pat Donnelly. Mm-hmm. He was in Little Egg Harbor. He's now in Lakewood, but at the time he was the director of Little Egg Harbor. And he had pretty much this to say about the storm. And our sound engineer will play this here in a minute.
Even as a young kid, I always kind of followed the weather, but seeing the track coming the way that it was coming, and it kind of always hit that peninsula coming off, just passing the Carolinas and then Delaware, like down that way, and it kind of always helped Jersey, But once I saw that track and I started seeing it, and I'm like, oh Lord, I saw what was coming from the west, what was pushing into the east, and that's what I saw. And I was like, honestly, in all my life as a young kid, in my early career, and in where I am now, I've never seen something like that before. That was something unprecedented. I've never seen something like that.
Well, yeah, that's absolutely what I'm talking about here. It was just when the models all came around to that consistent path, that's when I got scared.
Right.
All right. It's coming. This was an unknown for New Jersey. My first hurricane experience is Donna. Okay, a long time ago, way before you guys. And Donna was a Category 2 storm that moved off the New Jersey coast. And it may still be the only Category 2 storm that's affected New Jersey. Never made landfall in New Jersey. But there were 90-mile-an-hour winds. There was wind damage. There was a big water levels rose. The surge was high, especially in Long Island and New York. But typically, New Jersey experiences storms that run parallel to the coast.
Right.
This storm came right at us. This storm took aim and came directly 90 degrees towards us. And it's like, okay, here comes this railroad train. Right. What do we do? How do we get off the track? And you can't.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, his comments are dead on. That's what we were thinking.
Because that is the worst case scenario. A storm coming
absolutely
due west at us is going to pile up all that water against the shoreline, pile it up into the sound, focus it on New York City area.
Not allow it to flow back into the ocean. Right.
That constant east wind or east-northeast wind just blowing in to the coast. And plus we had, I believe it was a high tide cycle at the time with the full moon.
We had high tide. We had not just like when people say full moon, like within 3 days of the full moon, they're still saying full moon. Oh, it looks full.
Yeah.
It was 100% illumination on October 29th in the late afternoon. Okay. So it could not have coincided. When I say perfect storm, everything came together.
Right. I mean, and to allude to your scary part, I mean, we're almost at Halloween, and this type of storm with the full moon and
you're right.
There high tide cycles. I mean, it was almost like it was meant to be a kind of big storm. Now, before this, I mean, the biggest storm that I've ever experienced was the Superstorm in '93, and I think that had about a 960 millibar pressure. Coming in.
I don't remember. I mean, I know the storm well. That was one of the that had probably the most geographical coverage of snowfall of any storm that I can remember. I mean, from the southern Appalachians to Canada to
even
Maine.
Northern Alabama saw significant snow.
Mitchell in North Carolina was like 50 something inches.
Yeah, exactly.
And it had a severe aspect to it too. That was the one that blew that almost like, I guess, a derecho basically into like Tampa Bay and right across the Gulf.
It was.
Yeah. It was that line that came through central Florida. I can still see that squall line.
Yeah. So when we talk about Sandy, that was my benchmark at the time. The Superstorm in '93 was my biggest storm to impact the area. Then I saw this thing, and I'm thinking to myself,
"You just get the blizzard of '96, though, Mike."
And you were thinking, if it was only snow.
No. Actually, when we first started talking about the storm, the year prior, we had a snowstorm around Halloween.
Right.
And we first thought that, well, maybe this will be a redo of what we had the prior year.
A snow came.
And we were looking at it because it looked cold. And, well, it still was cold in parts of West Virginia. So that was something that we first started talking about it on our social media channels on Twitter on the 21st.
Wow.
Now, the storm hit New Jersey on the 29th. So we first started talking about it there. We first started talking about it in our blogs and discussing the situation on the 22nd.
Now, I don't think we've ever done that 8 days in advance.
Yes. And the reason that we did this was because I did mention the Canadian model earlier having the storm solution, but it was still all over the place. But the European model was so darn consistent. Every single run was bringing it into New Jersey or somewhere along the Northeast from Cape Cod to the Delmarva. And when you see that kind of consistency out of a model like the European, I mean, I think it basically put the model on the map.
Oh, it's the comparison is every storm now. Well, the Euro got Sandy right, so it has to be right.
That is still a question that I'm asked almost all the time. And, as meteorologists, everyone that comes up to you and asks you what you think about the weather. Mm-hmm. And for years after that, what's the Euro say?
Yeah.
What's the Euro say? It definitely put that model on the map.
Yeah.
In fact, it put, I think, all the models on the map. Because no one would talk about the models as much prior to that. Now it's like, the American model says this, the European model says this.
Right.
In the public domain of weather forecasting, it's become much more the common nomenclature to say the Euro. I'm cool if I say... If I ask that question.
Well, now, isn't that kind of a little bit of the issue nowadays as far as communicating the weather, though? Because these models are
they're available to everyone, right?
To everybody.
Oh, yeah.
And we always talk about combating hype. And we always run into that issue, with our forecasting nowadays.
Social media, the media itself, TV, right.
Now, this is a situation, though, where it was kind of the opposite, though. Because, you always combat hype. However, this one had backing. For
this one situation, it needed it.
So what kind of issues did you see, Frank, in that when we always get a lot of hype in the media. Now we have a storm that actually needs the hype. Like, how do we battle something like that?
That's a challenge. At the beginning of this event in 2012, the storm path and track that the Euro had, that the Canadian occasionally had, a week before, 8 days before, I was respective of it, but at 8 days out, I didn't believe it. Sure. Okay? Didn't believe it. However, I remember having conversations with our operational team here, and Sean and Kevin at that time, and you have to weigh these situations based on magnitude, like you're saying, Mike. Low probability, extreme magnitude, I've got to mention it. Low probability or moderate probability, 5 days out, the magnitude stays the same here. So the magnitude wasn't changing. The magnitude was getting worse because more models were indicating a direct hit. So you always have to balance the magnitude of the event versus the probability of the event to assess the risk of the event. As we got closer to the event, we realized that there were so many other things: a lack of experience in New Jersey, a lack of preparation in New Jersey, and all those things again combined with this perfect storm scenario. But as Brad said, there's just so much weather information available to the public these days, and so many models, that it's become more challenging with these models. How many times has this year, there have been at least 4 or 5 or half a dozen times where the models have predicted a significant hurricane off the New Jersey coast.
Right.
We haven't even had one come close other than the remnants of Ian.
Right.
And the remnants of Ian are only producing 30, 40 mile an hour winds, but still doing considerable damage along the Jersey coast.
Right.
All right. Didn't have to be that major hurricane. In fact, it wasn't any of those major hurricanes that were forecast. So an 8-day forecast, the model's now going out 10, 15 days. The reliability of those are relatively low. And we shouldn't believe hype that's out more than a week, I'd say, at this point. But it does make for headlines.
Right.
I was going to say on the media side now, I mean, I'll chime in on my side. And now, as I mentioned earlier, I lived down south at the time. I was at TV Met down in Charleston for about 15 years before WeatherWorks. And down there, summertime forecast, 30% chance of an afternoon thunderstorm. Everyone's like, yeah, normal. I'll tell you one thing, though. When hurricanes start to work their way up the newscast and you start to lead with the possibility, everyone's eyes and ears are wide open down there. They respect what could happen only when in South Carolina because of Hugo. And I'll tell you, Hugo was north of Charleston, and it's still, they didn't have power in some places for 2-3 months. The landfall, the eye actually went north of there in McClellanville. Charleston had an offshore wind. They had some flooding, not as bad as it could have been, but it still devastated the city. So when Sandy, of course, started to make its turn up towards Cuba into the Bahamas, and it started to turn, it turned northwest. That's when all the alerts and sirens are, they led every newscast. We led every single newscast. Our chief meteorologist on it all day. I mean, we had updates. Then the model started to turn it more, because anytime it's pointed towards that way, it's a Hugo track. And they're thinking, and they're already in OPCON 2, OPCON 3. We got to get ready. They prepare early. And then as soon as that storm track started to turn north a little bit, and we're getting a little bit, okay, maybe we're out of the woods. And once it gets to our latitude and it's moving north, we're like, whew, we're out of the woods on this one. But of course, when we started to see the track for the Mid-Atlantic, and my parents lived up here, I'm thinking, they're back in the Poconos still, but granted, everyone's going to get impacted by this. And I didn't want to think about New York City. And then you guys, of course, went through the whole thing. And the media side could be your pal. The media side can produce the hype and things where we're fighting that sometimes. But yeah, in this situation down south, I'll tell you, Sandy was not like messed around with. It was because they did have that Hugo experience. The interesting thing about the two storms, at least I find it interesting, is that Sandy in the models was forecast to turn left. Hugo was not. Right.
Hugo, we were preparing for Hugo here because the storm was tracking parallel to the coast until the Carolinas, and then perhaps turning west into Delaware Bay, into the Chesapeake Bay area. But it made a left turn, and then it ended up in Ohio. It just kept, once it made up its mind,
right,
it just went northwest and kept hit the coast. Yep. And then kept moving inland across the Appalachians. And
on the meteorology part of that, the reasoning for that, because this is long after Hugo hit down there when I was living down there, but I looked at all the data, and my old chief, Bill Walsh, he's still there at the station I worked at. There was an upper level low that was unmodeled in the eastern Gulf of Mexico.
Okay.
That is what kind of pulled it just enough back to the northwest and for it to make a landfall. But like you said, it was supposed to actually continue further up towards maybe clipping like the Outer Banks or something.
Exactly. There was a good sized trough that was moving it northwest, and it's over the course of a night. The next day, the storm's keeps turning toward the west, and there was some circulation in the Gulf of Mexico, and it was probably a little short wave moving around the main big trough that just pulled it back into the trough earlier. But and I don't know what the notice was for Charleston, maybe 48 hours, but it certainly wasn't.
It changed quick.
It was not
what they told me.
Yeah, it wasn't like 5 days in advance or anything like that.
And pivoting back to Sandy, we sent out our first statements for this storm to our clients on the 23rd, October 23rd.
Wow, 6 days in advance.
6 days in advance of landfall on the 29th. And I do have the first statement here, and we listed the two scenarios. I got to say, there was a meteorologist on this, and it did say Mike Mahalik, by the way. So I just wanted to get that out there.
All right.
No, it was a collaborative effort. I remember us all talking about what we're going to say. But we talked about the two tracks. We talked about a track that could have Sandy pass out to sea. Cold front swings through. We don't really see much impacts. The second track, though, was the more significant impact that actually occurred. And we talked about how a significant impact somewhere between the Delmarva and Cape Cod. The second scenario will bring heavy flooding rainfall, damaging winds, substantial coastal flooding, and beach erosion to the northeast. Now, I read this, Frank, and I know how we are as a company, and we are typically conservative, and we want to make sure that we got it right when we get our forecasts out. With us mentioning that in the first statement, that leads me to believe that we were pretty confident about that scenario happening.
We were, again, we were pretty confident, but magnitude was way off the charts.
Right.
Okay. In that scenario, the magnitude was so big and so destructive that we had no choice. It left us no option at that point.
Had to say something, right?
Right.
So we got those first statements out. Our first storm alerts went out on the 26th. So we're still way ahead of the game here. And I got to say,
72 hours.
Again, our guy, Pat Donnelly, one of our clients, started prepping early for Sandy. And I want to say it's because of our forecasts, being what they were saying. But we do have a clip from Pat Donnelly, again, talking about how they started prepping before the storm.
And I would say that's when we started to board up our township building. We, brought in, rented generators more than, we had onboard generators for all our buildings. We did a lot of that stuff because of Hurricane Irene. We kind of prepped better than most towns did, no disrespect to them, but we did a lot of that stuff to bring all that equipment in to prepare ourselves so we could still function. Had extra diesel fuel on hand, regular gas on hand, all those different things. And it's just, I always prepared, spoke to you guys at WeatherWorks and made sure hey, just keep getting me updated. I was probably the most annoying client you guys had at the time, to be honest.
All right. So Frank, there you have Pat Donnelly, one of our clients, utilizing, some of the information that we were giving him to make those preparations.
Telling us he's the most annoying client, but
yeah,
you know what?
They're not annoying.
Not at all. Not at all.
Pat's great.
Yeah.
But yeah, being proactive, because that's the job that level requires. we were being proactive in the meteorological sense,
Right.
Helping prepare our clients and doing stuff. And when I look back, I don't think we did enough. But I mean, maybe not enough for the staff. We're preparing for where people are going to stay. Are there hotels? Are there, what happens if this, looking for contingency plans. We thought we had them in place, but again, we planned for an event that wasn't Sandy.
Right. We planned for a big event, but
yes,
historic event.
We're used to those snowstorms, knock us out for a few hours.
But I do remember that, those forecasts leading up were getting more and more dire every time we would do a forecast. We have, our wind impacts at extreme and our coastal flooding at extreme, but it's like we couldn't say it enough, like how dire the circumstance was. And that's, I think, where we're trying to bust through that, hype that we always have to deal with. No, this is the real thing, everybody. This is the one.
This is the worst case scenario.
There is nothing worse that we can see, in our lifetime as forecasters that would be this bad. So I did notice that, our wording was getting more dire. And I think one of our forecasters, Ken Elliott, also had something to say about our forecasting that we'd like to play here right now.
I would say it was a gradual buildup of forecaster anxiety at some level and a little bit of each one of us meteorologists that likes to see active weather. And each day it became kind of more real. And then I would say it was a day or two before the storm when we were like, okay, there's just really no way out here. This is becoming a worst case scenario. And it's just a matter of how bad it will be over how large of an area. And I think that anxiety towards the end of it, knowing that people, some of us with loved ones and friends, our clients, and just the community at large, we're going to have a large deal of trouble as we went through the week.
Yeah, I mean, so there you have it. I mean, yeah. I felt that same sentiment when I was listening to this clip before the podcast. I was getting the butterflies in my stomach again.
Me too. Absolutely. I sensed the same thing, and because we thrive on adrenaline during these storms as meteorologists. But there comes a point, and that point, we got to that point with Sandy where, hey, yeah, we got this adrenaline boost. This is an amazing event, historic event meteorologically, and we are experiencing it as meteorologists. But then it turns, and you start thinking of family. You start thinking about my home, my property, my kids, school, what's going on. And so we all felt that as the storm is approaching the coast. And it became, as Ken said, real. Not just real we're just not forecasting a snowstorm here.
Right.
We're forecasting an
historic,
event that will be so historic that people are going to be
that we're going to talk about 10 years later.
10 years later.
Yeah.
I got those same butterflies, Spike.
Right. And look, during the storm, when that storm started making that landfall, we started seeing all that coastal flooding happening. And sometimes that coastal flooding was happening 2 or 3 high tides before it was even making landfall.
Yeah. Oh, it did. It started a few tides before it made landfall.
And once that started making that impact, like you said, that's when it started really hitting home. And are we okay? And I think there was always a moment in the storm when it was hitting that it was kind of like, okay, this is like a big storm. Okay, I get it. And there was that moment almost in everybody that was like, oh no, this is much different.
We're only in this a couple of hours. Yeah, look what's already happened.
Yeah, this is not good.
Well,
and
yeah, I agree. The storm's coming, it's raining, the wind's picking up, and you're going, okay, I can handle this. It's about 8:00 at night now, and the storm's made landfall, and the winds just shifted from northeast to northwest, and I heard this roar come through my woods and trees popping, and boom, that's when the power went out. And it was like, and for the rest of the night, it was, just banging and banging.
And I remember that same exact thing because I was staying in a local hotel here in Hackettstown, and we were all having a good time. I think it was a couple of our meteorologists. We were staying in the same room, and there was actually a party going on down the hall, believe it or not. People were
Hurricane party.
calling it a hurricane party, right? So then this situation happened. Like you said, 8, 9, 10 o'clock, all of a sudden, you start hearing stuff cracking. Yeah. You start hearing stuff breaking. You start hearing that, howling wind noise that everybody always talks about. And then things started flickering. And then big gust, all out. All the lights. You looked out the window. Nothing on the hillside was on.
How was your breakfast the next morning?
We didn't have a breakfast. We got some flashlights out and we kind of, got to our cars and made our way into the office, which was a very eerie experience. No lights on, branches, trees down everywhere. And you're just trying to, and I'm just talking about coming through these neighborhoods that are close to our office, these back roads.
I know.
And I'm going, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like, I can't even, I knew it was going to be bad, but when you get into that situation and you're experiencing it, you're like, oh my, this is like the worst thing that could possibly happen.
And to realize, okay, we've been forecasting this event for 8 days or 6 days.
It's like our life.
It's fun. Exactly. It's arrived. Yes, it's done what we expected, maybe even worse. Because we don't know at that point. We don't know if people are receiving our forecast anymore. Right. We don't know about communication. We are having problems with communication, the perspective changes all of a sudden. Okay, we're forecasting now. We're on the storm, and soon we'll be post-storm. What do we do? How do we manage the office? Where are these meteorologists? Where are they staying? Can they get here? There were stories that I heard in the next few days of meteorologists driving to work. I only had to drive over 3 power lines, okay? Or my car barely fit under this tree that was falling, and I got it between. It was like
guilty.
Yeah, okay. They might have been all your stories.
That's what I did.
But and that's the way the roads were for a week, and some of the back roads just stayed that way for 7 days, 10 days, 14 days.
Yeah. And I think pretty much everybody got to that point during the storm where it was like, oh no, this is way bigger than I thought it was going to be. And we have another one of our clients, Alan Spector, he's from Manalapan in New Jersey, and he had this to say about the storm, which is pretty amazing.
The bigger equipment was sitting here ready to go. We did at the beginning of the storm have them on the road clearing trees as they were blocking roads. But at some point, it got to be too dangerous. Myself and the chief of police decided to pull everybody off the road unless there was like imminent life or death at that point.
During the storm, it was kind of weird because for the first several hours, it really wasn't too bad. Sure, the winds were gusty by us, but we were well inland, so we really weren't getting, it was typical 20 to 40 mile per hour winds for most of the late afternoon and early evening. I want to say between like 8 and 10 p.m. that night, though, things ramped up significantly. The howling wind that you always hear people telling about. Well, I kind of heard that for the first time in my life that night. Before that point, though, we kind of rushed to get one more round of updates out to our clients because we were anticipating not only our own communications problems, but at some point our clients, even if they were in relatively good shape, would lose power and so on and wouldn't be able to get any forecasts.
So there you have kind of similar stories from our client, Alan, and also our meteorologist, Ken Elliott, talking about there was that point where they just had to pull people off the road. Things started failing from our communication side and from the power aspect. And I remember that well when I came in that morning. We're on generator power, but our internet was down. And we had the backup internet, but only one port was working. And we had to try to make this work. How are we going to make this work for more than one station?
Yeah. How are all these meteorologists going to?
Right. And, I forget who it was came up. It might have been a former meteorologist came up with an idea like, oh, we can all plug into this switch and we can split it and we can get a cord here and a cord there. So we had these wires just running
a
all
maze of orange extension cords. Upstairs, downstairs.
Yeah, and there is a picture of that that I remember on putting on our social media channel of all the wires running to all the desktops, and I'm sure we'll be able to show that to you here. But it was just amazing, and you were only getting so much bandwidth out of the one line that I remember utilizing my phone's 4G service to try to get some sort of, weather model information. Yeah. But then that was the other thing. Everything was down. Yeah. All the METARs, all the reporting stations were out of power. So there was nothing.
Exactly. All the weather stations, the weather service observations were down. The mesonet stations, or like local observers that have their own instruments, their power was out too. So we really, it was a true test of meteorological skill because there wasn't much data to work with 24 hours afterwards. And and
like you said earlier, Frank, you weren't even sure how many or who were still getting the forecast.
Exactly.
Not only on our end.
No, we didn't know what their capabilities or resources were as well on that end. The role or the job that I took on that next morning was, okay, are people in hotels? Yes, but there's no power. And it's getting warm and stuffy. And that went on for days. Are people fed? Let's get food to the people. What evolved over the next week was the gas stations had no power.
I couldn't pump the gas.
And they couldn't pump gas. And the few that did have power had lines that were half a mile long. And some of our meteorologists needed to commute back 10 or 20 miles or more. And we can't come in because at that point, now we have the capability of working remote since COVID. But back then, it was a rare opportunity. Yes, you can make a few phone calls on your cell phone, but we didn't have the capability to work remotely. So we needed to bring people into our office. I became the runner for gas. I immediately collected 25, 30 gallons of gas at my house.
Wow.
And I remember one meteorologist, I wish I remember his name. I don't remember his name, but he ran out of gas in line somewhere, and I had to run him over 5 gallons so he could make it to the pump to get filled up. And then others would call me and say, Frank, I can't come in because I only have a quarter of a tank and I'm going to use most of it to get there and I won't be able to get back home. I said, well, you can come in anyway because I can give you 10 more gallons.
Okay, there you go.
I was portioning out this gas to individuals and meeting them in different places and driving, and it was a nightmare.
See, this whole part of the podcast is fascinating to me because I wasn't here to live this, and I read what I could, I saw what was happening, but just to listen to the stories and I've been at WeatherWorks for 5-6 years now, and I can just imagine, I just imagine now when we have big snowstorms and the commotion and the anxiety and the what was the other word, the adrenaline. I couldn't even imagine what this was. And again, as a meteorologist, that's why you're in this business. Right. And just to hear these stories, to hear Ken talk, hear our clients. I mean, it's just fascinating to me to actually kind of relive this through you guys.
Well, I mean, it was gas. My wife would ask me when I get home a couple days later, she'd say, what's the forecast for the next few days? I says, I haven't looked at a weather map all day. I've been getting bagels, getting pizza, booking rooms, delivering gas. I says, I totally lost touch with the forecast the next few days.
And that was one of the most difficult parts, was trying to build an accurate forecast with limited data that you were getting.
Really testing your skills.
Yeah. I mean, I was about ready to walk out to the parking lot and, do the whole finger in the air thing and see which way the wind's. Oh, it's coming out of the southwest. So I guess Sandy's off to the, across Pennsylvania somewhere right now. But no, it wasn't to that extent, but yeah, I mean, it really did test our skills. And then you're thinking to yourself, like you said before, is anybody even going to get these forecasts? Like, you're hoping that they have the redundancy to get them. But, with the power out, phone lines struggling, you didn't know if they had internet or if they were going to have the phone service to get a fax. You just hoped, that things got where they needed to go.
So we touched on now the kind of after the storm, we had our employees trying to get in and what they saw, and in today's dollars, Sandy did $73.5 billion in damage, and that's the sixth behind Katrina, Harvey, Maria, Irma, and Ida. Again, it was something to see when you and I talked to our when I talked to Pat Donnelly and I talked to Alan Spector. I asked them both, and we have a soundbite here coming from Alan. I said, well, when you shut your maintenance garage door the night before it started to work its way in, what did you see actually when you woke up the next morning, or when you were able to go outside? And Mike, I think will play that for us right now.
Oh, it was like a war zone. Yeah, we had to start by dividing up our crews and sending them out. Obviously, we were getting some information back, but at some point, even obviously landlines didn't work. We did have some cell service at that point, but the cell towers weren't what they are today, where everything has got generators on them and everything else. So cell service was even spotty at best. So we had power, probably more than 3/4 of the town without power because of all the power lines that were down. We had trees through buildings and houses, trees across roads. For us, it was a significant tree damage storm, which created, every other type of damage.
So there you go from Alan. I mean, just basically looking like a war zone is pretty much a good description of that. I mean, trying to drive home and that was almost an impossibility with the amount of tree damage that you were dealing with and the down power lines and things like that. I mean, look, there was 8.5 million people without power across the eastern U.S. 5.5 million was just in New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut.
Right.
I mean, amazing amount of damage that was done here by Sandy.
Yeah. And the wind factor, like I said, each of these storms is different. The coastal residents remember the flooding, remember the erosion, remember some of the wind. And I was talking to you, Mike, earlier about a friend of mine that actually stayed on Long Beach Island during the storm, and with a beachfront home, sent his wife and 2 daughters inland, and decided that he was going to brave out the storm and live to tell the story. It's a horrendous story of fury. Mother Nature winning out, basically,
right.
Eroding dunes and flooding his house, and him hoping for the best. And he also remembers that wind shifting.
Right.
And he says to me, for a moment, I thought, okay, I've been undermined by water, but the winds haven't been so bad. Now they're 80 miles an hour out of the northwest, and he feels like the house is going to just collapse and fall. So scary moments for all of us, but that war zone quote is the way it looked the next day.
Yeah, and we're just talking about the wind damage mostly, but you alluded to the coastal flooding and the coastal damage. I mean, that was just, we're talking about flood subways that were flooding in New York City.
And saltwater flooding to make it, but it's
Yeah.
bad enough to have freshwater flooding, but that salt
Right.
create a havoc on the lines and stuff.
Yeah, you just didn't get a sense. You didn't you knew it was going to be bad ahead of time, but you didn't get the sense of how much impact it was going to have.
The experience level here in New Jersey, it's going to flood, but is salt water going to flood all the telephone lines?
Yeah.
All the sewer lines, the corrosion that occurred, and the total reconstruction of some of the infrastructure on LBI had to be done. And we saw some of it. We saw them beginning that construction when we were down there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the funny thing about this storm is that personally, my house never lost power. It flickered once.
You weren't in that 5.5 million.
I was not. I don't know how everybody else was out power. I know my family was out power for 5 or 6 days. But for some reason I didn't. So it was pretty amazing.
You know what I did?
Got lucky there.
You know what I did 2 weeks before Sandy by coincidence?
What's
I installed a generator at my house. Because of that snowstorm that occurred the year before.
Okay, yeah.
Snowstorm a year earlier, or 2 years earlier, I forget the year.
Yeah.
And we had lost power for 5 days. So during Sandy, our power was out for about 11 days. But with the generator, I managed to keep it on, off, on, off. The problem was that I don't have a natural gas line that comes to my home. I have a propane tank. So I'm managing 100 gallons of fuel, making sure that I don't run out.
Right. Yeah, I did not go for the generator purchase until after March 2018 when we had lost power. There was 4 nor'easters that month, and I lost power for 5 days, and I had a brand new house, and I heard everybody around me that held older homes all had generators, and I'm like, I think I might need a generator out here.
I have a few hundred feet of extension cords I got to loan you.
Yeah, there you go. But I do have one now. And I happened to be at Lowe's at the right time, it seemed. But, so some of that coastal damage that we talked about, and we have plenty of pictures from that, we actually saw that with our own eyes.
Yeah, you guys went down there, right?
Right. Frank, you could speak more to this about how we brought some of our company down there.
Well, we, again, the storm's coming in. There's the adrenaline. There's the excitement. We forecast it. We think about our families. We think about our homes. Then the storm passes. We start cleaning up our properties. But for a week, I had no TV to even see video of what was going on. And with internet on and off, it was very difficult to get some consistent images of what was going on when we realized, wow, these are our clients. These are people we know, people we work with. We really felt just the natural need to, hey, what can we do to help? And I asked the staff, they were all for it. I don't remember how many of us there were, maybe 8, 10.
Yeah, I think there might have been 2 groups. I think there might have been 2 groups of 4 or 5.
So over 2 weeks, we stationed ourselves in Absecon, and we split our time between helping one of the rescue areas, or I shouldn't say rescue, but the post-storm assistance areas in Manahawkin and our client, Stafford Township, and responded to calls, emergency calls that they had, or calls for help that they had on Long Beach Island and Stafford Township, in basically in the Barnegat Bay area, and the other was in Atlantic City.
Right.
I'm not sure which one you were at, or if you went to both. Or if you stayed.
I think I went to both.
Okay.
The Atlantic City was.
The Atlantic City was just helping at a resource center with supplies and
donations, things.
Donations and supplies, and both very rewarding. Great bonding among the group. It probably was one of the most rewarding 2 weeks I've had, I think, in my meteorological career. The time we spent with some of these homeowners, especially the ones flooded out. I remember one couple, Beach Haven West, couldn't reach their daughter for days. Their car was totaled, damaged from the rain. They were probably in their 80s, still living in the house 10 days after it had
no power, no running water.
This is after 5 feet of water in the house. You walk in and the stench from the mold. Remember, we were wearing masks and pulling up those rugs and trying to, but they were so appreciative.
And say they're probably so grateful just to have anyone helping them. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, and it was also a very humbling thing too.
Absolutely.
Because, we talk about the excitement of a big storm as meteorologists and we know the tolls that it can have on the community, but we actually saw what that toll was and seeing that.
Remember the mounds of garbage outside each house, like 10 feet tall, of just wood.
Well, that's what Alan Spector was saying. I mean, I can't remember the number he had, but thousands of cubic, damage.
And you saw the damages on these coastal houses on LBI.
Oh yeah.
And we actually went beyond the dunes to see the amount of erosion that happened and where the dunes broke through. And I remember actually taking a picture of you, and I don't think you knew it at the time.
I know. I'm down there in the distance. It looks like I'm contemplating the universe.
Yeah, you're looking off into the shoreline, and you're just like looking at it, and
because it was so amazing.
Right, and you were looking at it, and I don't know what was going through your head at the time when you were looking at all that, but it had to be something to the effect of, holy expletive.
Yeah.
Amazing.
It was amazing. Just I still remember just about every location we went to at that time with the group, and everyone just so happy to see us. We all had our own problems. Now, Mike, he didn't lose power. Everybody else did.
Somehow I got lucky.
But, I still have trees that have fallen on my property that from Sandy that I haven't cleared yet, that are in a wooded area. And we all had problems, power outages, trees down, but they were small. And Mike says humbling. They were small compared to the losses that these people, their houses were gone, or they had to be completely rebuilt. And some were just devastated and living in this like dampness,
right.
Week, 10 days after the storm.
So let's kind of turn towards, wrapping this up a little bit. I mean,
the future.
Yeah. What have we learned from Sandy? What have we learned? What has it taught us? I mean, I know here from a business aspect, I know we have a much higher redundancy with our communication systems, ability to work not in the office, remotely. But what else can we learn from this is maybe just as a whole
company,
and even as the community.
Services that we
meteorologically, from our standpoint, I think we've learned to respect the outlier in the models, not just to blow it off. Okay, is there a trend here?
Except for a 364-hour GFS snowstorm.
Right.
Those we can let go.
When it's out 15 days, but we balance, I think, magnitude of the event better than we did 15, 20 years ago, because at that point, the reliability of the forecast out 7-8 days were not as good as they are now. Okay, there's better science now than there was 10, 20 years ago. And I think community-wise, communities have better contingency plans now. The building codes have changed. The safety codes have changed along the Jersey Shore. There's still a big argument about whether we replenish the beaches or not, or do we let those homes just fall into the water? And that argument, I think, will go on until we can't build there anymore forever. But most of the communities have better plans. I think we have to plan for an event that's worse than Sandy. And I'm not sure if communities are doing that, but the contingency plan should be that. And most businesses now do have some type of business continuity plan. And I know one of our clients, Wawa, I mean, that's big on their agenda and their priorities is, how do we sustain an event? How do we get our stores open quickly? How do we move forward and, serve our clientele?
Sure. I mean, and I'm not, obviously I'm not working at a DPW or anything like that, but I'm sure their preparations are much more thorough.
Yeah.
After a storm like Sandy, it always seems to work that way. You always have to see that worst case scenario.
Well, and I think it was Pat Donnelly that mentioned, we had Irene the year before that. And then from the few I was talking to, they said, we went through Irene and we're thinking Sandy's not going to be anything like Irene. And Irene was well inland, obviously. It was more of a wind issue.
Right.
This one, top.
Well, combined everything.
Right.
I think people have more generators these days. Mike, that would have been a good business to get into, you and I.
Generator business?
10 years ago, yes. No, more homes have generators, businesses have backup generators, and that wasn't the case 10 years ago. So there is a lot more thought going into it. What worries me is that as time goes by and people don't experience these events, then they become less likely to react correctly to these events. We're still building along the Jersey beaches. New homes are going up every day. In fact, last weekend I saw another one get knocked down, but they are building them better. Mm-hmm. Everything is 12 feet off the ocean, off the sand dunes right now. So, but how long will that last?
Yeah, should that be 14 feet off the sand?
Right. It's not a question of if there's going to be another Sandy. It's when. Right. Is it next year? Is it 20 years from now? But you're right. There's going to be another one,
or 200 years from now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, I think you brought up a good point here about preparing for the next one in the worst case scenario, and we just have to be ready for another event like that, because even though we just had Sandy 10 years ago, doesn't mean it can't happen next year. The odds are still there.
Yeah, and that's
the odds are going to be the same.
People get fooled by that. Okay, Sandy's a 1 in 250 year event,
right?
Every year.
Yes.
Every year it's the same odds,
right? Exactly.
But there are a lot of people that go and play slot machines, and their odds of winning that big jackpot are less than the odds of another Sandy coming in the next 100 years. So
Yeah. Well, Frank, thanks a lot.
Yeah, this is
Welcome.
for being here on the pod.
both you guys for me. I mean, like I said, I kind of lived the storm through you guys. I mean, I never had this much depth and so much description of the storm.
Right.
I saw what I saw, and that was it. But to hear it from you guys and hear it from the other meteorologists in the office that were here, Ken and Sean and Rob and those guys, it's just it's amazing.
Right.
It was an amazing 3 or 4 weeks. I think we even threw in some. Didn't it snow like the next week? Like the week afterwards.
I believe
November
it did.
6th or 7th.
Yes.
It was the most mixed up 2-3 weeks in my meteorological life.
We had snow afterwards. I remember the snow on the damage piles, seeing pictures of that. And it's just, that didn't help out anything. But I hope you're a little bit wrong, Frank, with the history aspect that people don't forget.
Yes.
But maybe our podcast here is just a little tiny bit of the effort to keep that memory alive, that we don't forget about a storm like Sandy, and that we remember, what can happen.
Right. What did happen.
Right. So, all right. So thanks again for joining us, Frank. And thanks everyone for listening. Remember, we'll have a new podcast every 2 weeks. So come back to the Weather Lounge and check those out. And please rate the podcast. It helps push things forward. And don't forget to find us at weatherworksinc.com and all our social media channels. So thank you, everybody. And thanks for joining us.